Admiral Varath stood at the viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the blue planet slowly rotate beneath the shadows of 10,000 warships. Earth. Such a small world. Such a young species. He had conquered dozens of civilizations in his long career, but none had been this easy. The humans had no idea what was coming. Around him, the bridge crew worked in perfect silence. They were Krellians, like him. Tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and eyes that saw into the infrared spectrum. The Krellian Empire was the strongest member of the Galactic Council, and Vorath was its greatest admiral. That was why the Council had chosen him to lead this mission. Admiral, his second-in-command, said, "All fleet elements report ready. 10,000 warships from 12 species. The encirclement is complete." Vorath allowed himself a small smile. The fleet stretched across the solar system like a net. No human vessel could escape. No human signal could reach the wider galaxy. Earth was completely alone. "Good," Vorath said. "Prepare the ultimatum broadcast." He had done this many times before. The Galactic Council had a simple method for dealing with troublesome species. First, they sent an invitation to join the Council under standard integration terms. This sounded friendly, but the terms were not friendly at all. Species that accepted lost their military, their government, and their freedom. They became servants of the older empires. Their young were taken for labor. Their resources were divided among council members. Most species accepted. They had no choice. The council controlled most of the galaxy, and resistance meant death. But some species refused. The humans had refused 3 times. Vorath remembered the council session where the decision was made. He had been there, standing among the representatives of 100 worlds. The council chamber was a massive sphere floating in deep space, built from the bones of a dead star. Inside, the leaders of the galaxy's great empires argued about what to do with humanity. "They are primitive," the Velian ambassador had said. The Velians were insect-like creatures who considered themselves the galaxy's intellectuals. "Their technology is barely functional. They cannot even travel faster than light without our trade routes. Why do we waste time discussing them?" "Because they are spreading," the Krellian emperor had replied. His holographic image towered over the chamber, 20 meters tall and burning with cold authority. "In 50 years, they have established colonies on 30 worlds. They trade with non-council species. They ask questions about our history. They are curious, Ambassador. Curious species are dangerous species." "Then we destroy them," the Torvak general had growled. The Torvaks were massive reptilian warriors who solved every problem with violence. "Send a fleet, burn their worlds, add their resources to our own." "That would be wasteful," another voice had said. This was High Minister Seleneth of the Athori, an ancient species of energy beings who considered themselves above physical concerns. "The humans have useful genetics. Their adaptability is remarkable. We should integrate them, not destroy them. Their labor would be valuable." And so the decision was made. The humans would be given one final chance to surrender. If they refused, they would die. All of them, every man, woman, and child. Their worlds would be sterilized, their history erased, their species forgotten. The galaxy would continue as if humanity had never existed. Vorath felt no guilt about this. It was simply how the universe worked. The strong ruled, the weak served, and those who refused to serve were removed. This was the natural order. This was peace. "The broadcast is ready, Admiral," his communications officer reported. Vorath straightened his uniform and stepped forward. A holographic recorder activated, capturing his image for transmission to the planet below. "People of Earth," he began, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority, "I am Admiral Vorath of the Galactic Council Enforcement Fleet. You are surrounded by 10,000 warships. Your solar system is sealed. You have no escape and no hope of rescue." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You have refused 3 invitations to join the Galactic Council. This was unwise. The Council does not ask 4 times. You now have 24 hours to accept unconditional surrender. You will disband your military forces. You will accept Council governance. You will welcome integration specialists who will restructure your civilization for productive contribution to the galactic community." Another pause. This was the important part. If you refuse or if you fail to respond, we will begin systematic cleansing of your species. Your colonies will be destroyed first, then your moon, then your planet. You will watch your children die before you die yourselves. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. The Council has done this before. We will do it again. You have 24 hours. He ended the transmission. Around him, the bridge crew continued their work. None of them felt any emotion about the message. They had heard similar messages many times. They had seen species surrender in terror. They had seen species resist and burn. Either outcome was acceptable to the Council. Varath returned to the viewport. Below, Earth continued to rotate peacefully. Its people were probably panicking right now. They were probably crying, praying, holding their loved ones. They were probably wondering why the universe was so cruel. Varath did not wonder about such things. He simply waited. 16 light minutes away, on the surface of Earth, the transmission reached the United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva. President Amara Chen watched the alien admiral deliver his ultimatum on a screen that filled an entire wall. Around her, the emergency council sat in stunned silence. The room was underground, protected by 300 meters of rock and steel. It had been built a century ago for nuclear war. Now it served a different purpose. Now it was where humanity would decide its fate. 200 ships, Defense Minister Kowalski said, his voice hollow. We have 200 ships against 10,000. He was a large man, a former soldier, but his hands were shaking. The math doesn't work, Madam President. There is no scenario where we survive military engagement. Perhaps we should negotiate, Foreign Minister Zhang suggested. She was older, experienced, known for her diplomatic skill. We accept the surrender but work to change things from within. Other species have done this. The Velmorans submitted to council rule and eventually gained limited autonomy. The Velmorans are slaves, General Okafor interrupted. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a Nigerian officer with 40 years of service. They lost 70% of their population to labor extraction. Their children are raised in council creche and taught to hate their own culture. That is not survival. That is death with extra steps. The argument continued, voices rising in fear and frustration. Some wanted to fight, some wanted to surrender, some wanted to try to run, to scatter humanity across the galaxy in the hope that some fragment might survive. President Chen listened to all of it. She was 57 years old, the daughter of immigrants, the first Asian American woman to hold her office. She had led humanity through 3 economic crises and 2 near wars. She had faced impossible choices before, but nothing like this. After an hour, she raised her hand. The room fell silent. Everyone except Cabinet-level Alpha will leave now, she said quietly. There was confusion. Cabinet-level Alpha was a classification that most people in the room had never heard of. Only 7 people present knew what it meant. They were the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the directors of 3 intelligence agencies, the Vice President, and the President herself. The others left. They looked confused, hurt, afraid. They were used to being important. They were not used to being excluded. But they obeyed because humanity was dying, and there was no time for argument. When only 7 people remained, President Chen walked to a secure terminal in the corner of the room. She pressed her palm against a scanner. She entered a code that she had memorized 20 years ago and had never used since. She spoke a phrase in a language that did not exist anywhere except in her own memory. A screen appeared. On it was a file marked with words that made her heart pound. Prometheus Contingency. Clearance Omega only. She opened the file. She read it. And for the first time since the alien transmission began, she smiled. The others watched her, not understanding. President Chen turned to face them. Her fear was gone. In its place was something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Everything you think you know about our military capabilities is wrong, she said. Everything the Council thinks they know is wrong. For 50 years, we have been preparing for this exact moment, and now it's time. She looked at General Okafor. Wake them up, she said. All of them. The general's eyes went wide. He understood. After a moment, he nodded and began entering commands into his own secure terminal. 16 light minutes away, Admiral Vorath continued to watch Earth through his viewport. He was thinking about his dinner. He was thinking about the medal he would receive when this mission was complete. He was thinking about how easy this was going to be. He had no idea that deep beneath the surface of Mars, lights were flickering on for the first time in decades. He had no idea that millions of soldiers were waking from frozen sleep. He had no idea that humanity had never been afraid of the stars. They had been waiting for the stars to come to them. 1,200 meters beneath the frozen surface of Mars, General Marcus Webb walked through corridors that stretched endlessly into the red darkness. Emergency lights painted everything in amber and shadow. The air was cold and tasted of recycled chemicals. The ground trembled as ancient systems came back to life after decades of sleep. This place was called Prometheus Base. It appeared on no map. It existed in no database. The 300 workers who had built it had volunteered to live their entire lives underground, cut off from the world above, to keep its secret. Most of them had died here, of old age, surrounded by the machines they had created. Their graves were somewhere in the deeper levels, marked with simple stones. General Webb had visited those graves once, years ago, when he first learned the truth. He had wept that day. He had not wept since. "General," a young officer called, hurrying to match his pace, "revival sequence is at 60%. We're waking approximately 4,000 soldiers per hour. At this rate, full activation will complete in 18 hours. "Speed it up," Webb replied without slowing. "We don't have 18 hours, we have 12. The officer nodded and fell back to relay the orders. Webb continued walking. Around him, the base was transforming from a tomb into a beehive. Soldiers stumbled from cryogenic pods, their bodies struggling to remember how to move. Medical teams rushed between them, injecting stimulants and nutrients. Voices echoed from every direction, confused, frightened, determined. These soldiers had volunteered for cold sleep, knowing they might never wake. They had left behind families, careers, entire lives to become humanity's secret weapon. Some had entered the pods as young men and women. They would emerge exactly as they had entered, while the people they loved had grown old and died above. Webb understood their sacrifice because he had made it himself. His wife had died 7 years ago. His daughter had given him 2 grandchildren he had never met. He had watched their lives through encrypted reports, birthday photos, and graduation videos delivered by dead drops and untraceable channels. He had missed everything that mattered so that everything that mattered could survive. This was the cost of the Prometheus contingency. This was the price of hope. He reached the central command chamber, a massive sphere carved from Martian rock and lined with screens showing data from across the solar system. 24 officers were already at work, coordinating the awakening of humanity's hidden forces. In the center of the room stood a holographic display of the solar system, every asteroid and moon rendered in perfect detail. "Show me the fleet," Webb ordered. The display changed. Now it showed ships, thousands of them, concealed in hollowed-out asteroids buried beneath lunar dust, hidden in the permanent shadow of gas giant moons. 15,000 warships, built over 50 years by workers who would never see the sun. Each ship was more advanced than anything the Galactic Council possessed. Each ship was crewed by soldiers who had given up normal lives to train in secret, and the Council thought humanity had only 200. Webb allowed himself a grim smile. The deception had been perfect. Those 200 visible ships were antiques, built with deliberately primitive technology, crewed by volunteers who knew they were bait. They existed only to be seen, only to make the Council confident, only to make the galaxy underestimate humanity. The real fleet had never been seen at all. "General," one of his officers reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. President Chen wants to speak with you directly." Webb nodded and activated a secure channel. President Chen's face appeared before him, tired but determined. Behind her, he could see the emergency council chamber, empty except for a handful of figures. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time in years. "What's our status?" "Fleet activation is proceeding. We'll have full combat readiness in 12 hours. Fighter squadrons are already launching from hidden bases. Orbital defense platforms are powering up across the system." He paused. "We can win this fight, Madam President. The question is what we do after we win." Chen nodded slowly. That's what I wanted to discuss. I've been reading the contingency files. The original plan calls for complete annihilation of the enemy fleet, followed by immediate strikes against Council homeworlds. Yes, ma'am. The theory was that we'd need to eliminate the Council's ability to respond before they could gather additional forces. And how many civilian casualties would that cause? Webb was silent for a moment. He had studied those numbers. He had tried not to think about them. Conservative estimates suggest 40 to 60 billion deaths across 11 worlds. Most would be non-combatants. Many would be members of enslaved species who have no voice in Council decisions. 40 billion people, Chen repeated softly, killed to prevent them from killing us. Yes, ma'am. The president stared at him through the holographic link. Her eyes were heavy with the weight of the decision she was about to make. We built all of this to protect who we are, she said. Our values. Our belief that every life has worth. If we murder 60 billion people to survive, what exactly have we protected? Webb understood the question. He had asked it himself many times during long nights in this underground tomb. I don't have an answer, Madam President. I only have ships and soldiers. What we do with them is your decision. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened, and Webb saw something change in her expression. The fear was still there, but it had been pushed aside by something stronger, by conviction. We're going to do this differently, she said. We're not going to become the monsters we feared. We'll defend ourselves, but we won't commit genocide. We'll show strength, but we'll also show mercy. If we survive this by becoming like the Council, then we haven't survived at all. We've just changed the name of the disease. Webb felt something loosen in his chest. He had hoped she would say that. He had been afraid to hope, but he had hoped anyway. Understood, Madam President. What are your orders? Reveal enough of our fleet to make them pause. Show them enough power to make them afraid. But don't show them everything. And don't fire unless they fire first. I want them to understand that we're choosing not to destroy them. I want them to see that mercy is possible. Maybe that will change something. And if they attack anyway, then we defend ourselves. But we don't pursue. We don't invade. We show them that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. She paused. I know this is a gamble, Marcus. I know I'm asking our soldiers to take risks they shouldn't have to take. But if we just wanted to survive, we could hide underground forever. We're not trying to survive. We're trying to prove that a better way is possible. Webb nodded slowly. I'll relay the orders. Admiral Ndegwa will command the revealed fleet. He's a good man. He'll understand what we're trying to do. Thank you, Marcus, for everything you've sacrificed. For everyone who sacrificed. The transmission ended. Webb stood alone in the command center, surrounded by the hum of awakening machinery and the voices of soldiers preparing for war. For 50 years, they had all worked toward this moment. They had given up everything for a fight they hoped would never come. Now it was here, and they were not going to throw away their souls to win it. 300 kilometers above Webb's head, in a smaller base hidden beneath the Martian North Pole, Captain Sarah Okonkwo strapped herself into the cockpit of her fighter. The ship was called a Phantom, a name chosen because enemies would never see it coming. It was 20 meters long, faster than anything the Council possessed, and armed with weapons that could crack a cruiser's shields with a single shot. Sarah had trained in simulators for 15 years. She had never flown in actual combat. She had never wanted to. She had become a pilot because someone had to, and because the alternative was letting humanity die. Her parents had died not knowing what she really did. Her brother thought she worked in asteroid mining. Her nieces and nephews sent her birthday messages that she could never answer. She had given up a normal life to sit in this cockpit, waiting for a war that might never happen. Now it was happening, and despite her training, despite her preparation, she was terrified. All Phantom squadrons, this is Fleet Command. The voice in her earpiece was calm, professional, reassuring. You have authorization to launch. You will proceed to designated coordinates and await further orders. You will not engage unless ordered or unless fired upon. Confirm understanding. Phantom 7 confirming, Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Around her, dozens of other fighters were launching from concealed hangars, rising through shafts in the Martian ice, emerging into the cold void of space. They formed up automatically, training taking over, fear pushed aside by discipline. As her ship cleared the planet's atmosphere, Sarah looked toward Earth, a small blue dot in the distance. Somewhere between her and that dot, 10,000 enemy warships waited to kill everyone she had ever known. And somewhere in the darkness, humanity's hidden fleet was waking up. She didn't know what was going to happen. She didn't know if they would win. She only knew that she would do her duty, whatever it cost. The stars around her glittered like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Somewhere among them, the Galactic Council believed they were about to erase a troublesome species from the universe. They had no idea how wrong they were. Admiral Vorath was eating dinner when the first reports arrived. The meal was traditional Krellian cuisine, raw protein cubes flavored with spices from his homeworld, served on plates made from the bones of conquered species. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, enjoying the power that came with his position. In a few hours, humanity would surrender or die. Either way, he would return home a hero. Admiral, his sensor officer's voice cut through the pleasant silence. We're detecting new contacts emerging from behind Earth's moon. Vorath sighed and set down his eating implements. The human fleet, I assume. The 200 ships they think we don't know about. Sir, the count is wrong. Something in the officer's tone made Vorath stand. He walked to the sensor display, his 4 hands clasped behind his back. What he saw made him freeze. 3,000 contacts, not 200. 3,000 human warships arranged in perfect formation, emerging from the lunar shadow like ghosts materializing from nothing. That's impossible, he breathed. Our intelligence was wrong, Admiral. For a long moment, Vorath stared at the display. His mind raced through calculations. 3,000 against 10,000. Bad odds for the humans, but not the impossible odds he had expected. This was no longer a simple extermination. This was an actual battle. But the Krellian Empire had fought actual battles before. They had always won. Contact all fleet elements, Vorath ordered, his confidence returning. Reform into combat formation. Charge all weapons. These primitives have more ships than we expected, but mathematics still favors us. We will simply have to work harder for our victory. The fleet began to move. 10,000 warships from 12 species adjusted their positions, preparing for engagement. Weapons powered up across the formation, shields activated, targeting systems locked onto the human vessels. Admiral Vorath watched the human fleet with new interest. They were not advancing. They simply held their position, a wall of metal between Earth and its executioners. Open a channel, Vorath commanded. Let's hear what they have to say before they die. The communication screen flickered, and a human face appeared. The man was dark-skinned, white-haired, with eyes that showed no fear whatsoever. He wore a uniform that Vorath did not recognize, covered in symbols that meant nothing to Krellian intelligence. I am Admiral James Ndegwa of the United Earth Defense Fleet, the human said. His voice was calm, almost friendly, as if he were greeting an old acquaintance, rather than facing his own death. I believe you've been speaking with my president. I've been speaking with a doomed species, Vorath replied. You've hidden some ships. Impressive for primitives, but you still face 3-to-1 odds. Surrender now, and I will recommend that the Council show mercy to your civilian population. Admiral Ndegwa did not reply. He simply smiled as if Vorath had told an amusing joke. Did I say something funny? Vorath demanded. You said 3-to-1 odds, Ndegwa replied. That's what's funny. Before Vorath could respond, something happened. A single human ship broke from the formation. It was small, barely 50 meters long, classified by Council systems as a light frigate. It accelerated toward the Eternal Dominion at a speed that made Vorath's sensor officers gasp. Track that vessel, Vorath shouted. Target it! Destroy it! The fleet's weapons opened fire. Plasma bolts, mass driver rounds, particle beams. Everything the nearest ships could throw at the tiny human vessel screamed through space toward it. None of them hit. The frigate danced through the fire like a leaf in the wind. It spun, twisted, accelerated in directions that should have torn it apart. The Council's targeting systems, designed to track ships 100 times larger and 10 times slower, could not follow it. Every shot missed by kilometers. And then the frigate stopped. It came to rest directly in front of Admiral Vorath's viewport, close enough that he could see the pilot's face through the cockpit glass. A young woman, dark skin, eyes that burned with quiet intensity. "That's not possible," Vorath whispered. "That's not possible." The frigate's single weapon, a device that looked almost laughably small, pivoted to point at a nearby asteroid, a rock perhaps a kilometer in diameter, floating harmlessly in the void. The weapon fired. The asteroid ceased to exist. Not exploded, not shattered. Ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next moment there was nothing but expanding gas and dust. "That was one ship," Admiral Ndegwa's voice continued over the communication channel. "One weapon, operating at 1% of its maximum output. We have shown you 3,000 ships. We have more, many more. But we didn't come here to destroy you, Admiral. We came to ask you a question." Vorath couldn't speak. His mind could not process what he had just witnessed. That tiny weapon had vaporized an asteroid in a single shot. His flagship's main battery could not have done that with a full minute of sustained fire. "The question is this," Ndegwa continued. "Do you want to see what happens if we stop holding back?" Chaos erupted across the Council fleet. Captains screamed for orders. Sensor officers reported impossible readings. Ships began breaking formation, some moving to attack, others moving to retreat, none knowing what to do. In the Torvak dreadnought crusher of worlds, General Thrak pounded his command console with rage. "Attack!" he bellowed. "Attack now, before they bring more ships. They're bluffing. They must be bluffing." In the Velian science vessel Observer of Truth, High Analyst Kren was running calculations that made no sense. "The energy output of that single shot," she muttered to her colleagues. "If these readings are accurate, that small weapon could destroy our entire fleet. But that's impossible. Our models say that's impossible." In the Athori command sphere, Minister Seleneth communed with her fellow energy beings in frequencies no other species could hear. "We must withdraw," she argued. "The humans have deceived us completely. We know nothing about their true capabilities. To fight them now would be suicide." Admiral Vorath stood at the center of this storm, staring at the human frigate that still hovered before his viewport. The pilot was looking back at him. She raised her hand in what might have been a wave, or might have been a salute, or might have been a gesture of contempt. Then her ship spun away and rejoined the human formation. "Admiral," his communications officer's voice was shaking, "the Council is demanding an update. They want to know why we haven't attacked." Vorath turned slowly. His certainty had crumbled. His confidence had evaporated. For the first time in his long career, he did not know what to do. "Tell the Council," he said slowly, "that the situation has changed. Tell them the humans are not what we believe them to be. Tell them we need guidance." "And our orders to the fleet?" Vorath looked back at the viewport. 3,000 human ships waited in silence. Behind them, Earth rotated peacefully. And somewhere in the darkness, the Admiral was suddenly certain thousands more ships were waiting to emerge. "Hold position," he ordered. "No one fires unless I give the command. We need time to understand what we're facing." It was the first sensible order he had given in his entire career. But as the minutes passed, and more reports came in about the impossible capabilities of human technology, Vorath began to realize that understanding might not be possible. The humans had played a game the Council didn't even know existed, and somehow, impossibly, the primitives were winning. On the bridge of the human flagship Unity, Admiral Ndegwa watched the Council fleet hesitate. He felt no triumph, only relief. The first step had worked. The enemy was afraid. Afraid species could be reasoned with. Afraid species could be shown a different path. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a priority message from President Chen." "Put her through." The president's face appeared on his private screen. She looked exhausted but resolved. "They're scared," Ndegwa told her. "The demonstration worked. They're requesting guidance from their government. What are your orders?" "They're scared now," Chen replied. "Scared species make terrible decisions. They either attack in panic or surrender completely and plot revenge. We need to give them a better choice, a path that lets them save face while changing course. With respect, Madam President, what kind of path can we offer to people who came here to exterminate us?" Chen was silent for a moment. Then she said something that Negwa would remember for the rest of his life. We offer them the path we would want someone to offer us if our positions were reversed. We offer them mercy, not because they deserve it, but because we want to be the kind of species that offers it anyway. Negwa nodded slowly. He had served his planet for 40 years. He had prepared for war his entire adult life. But in this moment, he understood that the real battle was not about weapons or ships. It was about who humanity chose to be. Understood, Madam President. What would you like me to say? Tell them the truth, Chen replied. Tell them who we are. Tell them what we want. And give them a chance to be better than they've been. Admiral Negwa took a deep breath. Then he opened a channel to every ship in the solar system, every relay station, every receiver in the galaxy that could pick up a human signal. What he was about to say would change everything. He just hoped it would change things for the better. Admiral Ndegwa's voice broadcast across the galaxy, reaching every ship in the Council fleet, every relay station along the trade routes, every world that could receive a signal. Billions of beings heard his words, from the great empires to the smallest enslaved colonies. What he said would be remembered for generations. We are humanity, he began. 50 years ago, we looked at the stars and saw empires built on conquest. We saw species enslaved under integration. We saw civilizations erased for the crime of wanting freedom. We decided then that we would not be victims. We prepared, we built, we waited, and now you see the result. He paused, letting the words settle. But today we also make another choice. We will not become what we feared. You came here with 10,000 ships to murder our children and erase our history. We have the power to do the same to you. We could destroy this fleet in minutes. We could strike your homeworlds while your ships burn. We could make you feel what every species you've conquered has felt. The Council fleet was completely silent. Every captain, every soldier, every being in 10,000 warships waited to hear what came next. We will not do this, Ndegwa continued. Not because we're weak. Because we're strong enough to choose differently. We offer you a path forward. Withdraw your fleet, return to your worlds, and join us in building something better than the galaxy has ever known. A community based on cooperation, not conquest, trade, not exploitation, where no species enslaves another, where strength protects the vulnerable instead of crushing them. He took a deep breath. This is our offer. We hope you accept it. The transmission ended. Across the Council fleet, the reaction was mixed. Some captains felt relief, grateful for a way out of a fight they now knew they would lose. Others felt rage, furious that primitives would dare lecture the galaxy's masters. And some, in the quiet of their hearts, felt something they had never expected to feel. Hope. Admiral Vorath was not among those who felt hope. He felt humiliation. He had led the greatest fleet in galactic history to threaten a species he had called primitive. And now that species was offering him mercy, the insult was unbearable. But Vorath was a survivor. He had not reached his position by acting rashly. He contacted the Galactic Council directly, requesting private audience with the Emperor himself. The Emperor's holographic image appeared in Vorath's private chambers, 20 meters tall, wreathed in the cold fire of imperial authority. Admiral, the Emperor said, explain this failure. Vorath chose his words carefully. The humans deceived us completely, Majesty. Their true military capabilities far exceed our estimates. They have shown us 3,000 ships, but they claim to have many more. Their weapons technology appears to be multiple generations ahead of our own. A direct assault would be extremely costly and might fail entirely. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was like ice. You are saying that these primitives could defeat the combined might of the Galactic Council. I am saying that victory is uncertain, Majesty, and even if we win here, we would lose a significant portion of our fleet. Other species might see that as an opportunity to challenge our dominance. The Emperor understood. The Council's power rested on the perception of invincibility. A costly victory could be worse than no battle at all. Very well, the Emperor decided. Stall them. Accept their offer of peace talks. Let them think they have won. Meanwhile, we will gather a larger fleet, 100,000 ships from every corner of the galaxy. When we return, there will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. There will only be extermination. Vorath felt relief wash over him. This was a plan he could execute. Understood, Majesty. How long do you need? 3 months. Keep them talking for 3 months. After that, their species will be nothing but ash and memory. The communication ended. Vorath allowed himself a small smile. The humans thought they were so clever. They thought their strength and their speeches would change the galaxy. They had no idea that their mercy would be their doom. He opened a channel to the human fleet. Admiral Ndegwa, I have communicated with my government. They are interested in your proposal. We request a peace summit to discuss terms. Shall we say neutral ground? Perhaps the human moon? Ndegwa's reply came quickly. We welcome your willingness to talk, Admiral. We'll make arrangements immediately. The Council fleet began to pull back, creating distance between themselves and Earth. Across the formation, soldiers relaxed slightly. It seemed that the crisis had been averted. It seemed that peace was possible, but in the shadows of the solar system, humanity's intelligence services were already at work. Encrypted communications were intercepted. Council frequencies were decoded. The Emperor's secret orders were laid bare. 3 hours after Vorath agreed to peace talks, President Chen received a briefing that changed everything. They're lying, General Webb reported, his holographic image grim. We intercepted communications between Vorath and the Krellian Emperor. They're planning to gather a fleet of 100,000 ships. They want Vorath to stall us for 3 months. After that, they plan to return and destroy us completely. President Chen sat in her office, staring at the intelligence report. Around her, her closest advisors waited in tense silence. So much for mercy, Defense Minister Kowalski muttered. It was worth trying, Chen replied quietly. We had to try. What do we do now? General Okafor asked. We could strike first, take out their homeworlds before they can assemble their fleet, end the threat permanently. Chen looked at him. You're asking me to authorize the deaths of 60 billion people, most of them civilians, most of them innocent. I'm asking you to save humanity. By becoming murderers, the room was silent. Everyone understood the choice. If they struck first, humanity would survive. But they would survive as monsters, remembered forever as the species that responded to a threat with genocide. If they waited, they would face a fleet 6 times larger than the one they had just turned away. Their technology was superior, but was it superior enough to overcome those odds? Captain Sarah Okonkwo's voice cut into the discussion. She had been patched in from her fighter, still on patrol near the lunar perimeter. Permission to speak, Madam President? Granted, Captain. I've spent my whole life preparing to fight this war. I gave up everything, my family, my future, everything, to be ready for this moment, and I'll fight to the death if I have to. But I didn't give up everything so we could become the monsters we feared. I gave it up so we could prove that there's a better way. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was fierce with conviction. There has to be another option, something between genocide and waiting to be overwhelmed. We're humans. We're supposed to be clever. We're supposed to find the third path. So find it. President Chen stared at Sarah's image on the screen, a young woman in a cockpit thousands of kilometers away, speaking truth to power because someone had to. She's right, Chen said finally. There has to be another way, and we're going to find it. She stood and walked to the window. Earth hung in the darkness, blue and beautiful and vulnerable. The Council's power rests on fear and oppression, she said slowly. Every member species rules through force. Every conquered people is controlled through loyalty implants and suppression technology. What if we removed that control? What if we gave the slaves the tools to free themselves? General Webb leaned forward. You're talking about fomenting rebellion across the entire galaxy. I'm talking about giving people a choice. The Council controls its subjects through technology. We've reverse-engineered that technology. We could create countermeasures, codes to disable loyalty implants, signals to shut down suppression systems. We could distribute them to every enslaved species in the galaxy. That would create chaos across the Council's territory, Minister Zhang said. They'd be too busy dealing with internal rebellions to gather a fleet against us. More than that, Chen said, it would give billions of people their freedom. The Council didn't enslave those species because they were evil. They enslaved them because they could. We're going to take that power away. She turned back to face her advisors. Contact Admiral Degwa. Tell him we accept the peace summit, but we're going to be very, very busy while we're talking. 3 months? The council wants 3 months to prepare their genocide? Fine. We'll use those 3 months to tear their empire apart from within. And if they still come? Okafor asked. If they still gather their fleet, despite the rebellions? Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then they'll arrive to find that we've had 3 months to prepare too. And they'll learn what happens when you threaten a species that refuses to become what it fights against. She looked at Sarah's image on the screen. Captain Okonkwo, thank you for reminding us who we're supposed to be. Sarah nodded once, a soldier receiving orders she believed in. Just promise me something, Madam President. What? Promise me that when this is over, and we've won, will actually be worth saving. President Chen felt the weight of that promise settle on her shoulders. It was heavier than any decision she had ever made. I promise, she said, or we'll die trying. The full human fleet emerged from the darkness. Admiral Vorath had been expecting something. 3 months of peace negotiations had been filled with strange reports. Rebellions on council worlds, unexplained system failures, enslaved populations suddenly turning on their masters. He had suspected human involvement, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his sensors now. 15,000 warships materialized at the edges of every council world simultaneously, not attacking, not advancing, simply existing, in positions that made their capabilities unmistakably clear. Every capital, every military installation, every center of power in the galaxy suddenly found itself within range of human weapons. And behind those warships, automated defense platforms began activating. Thousands of them, armed with weapons that could crack planets like eggs. They had been placed in secret over decades, hidden in asteroid fields and abandoned systems, waiting for this moment. Report, Vorath demanded, his voice barely steady. Human vessels detected at Krelia Prime, Torvac Central, Velian Nexus, and every other council homeworld, his sensor officer replied. Additionally, we're detecting massive fleet assets we've never seen before. Conservative estimate puts total human military strength at over 50,000 combat units. 50,000. The Council had been gathering 100,000 ships for their planned invasion. The humans had quietly assembled half that number and positioned them at the throat of every empire in the galaxy. They've been planning this for decades, Vorath whispered. Every decision we made, they anticipated. Every move we planned, they countered. Before he could say more, a transmission override seized every communication system in his fleet. President Chen's face appeared on every screen, her voice broadcast to every ship in the Council Armada. People of the Galactic Council, she said, you tried to enslave us. When we showed you we could not be enslaved, you planned to destroy us. We could do the same to you right now. Every Council world is within range of weapons that could crack your planets like eggs. We have the power to end your civilizations, to erase your histories, to make you feel what every species you've conquered has felt. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was quiet but filled with iron. We will not fire, not because we're weak, because we're strong enough not to. We're not going to become the monsters we feared. We're going to show you that there's another way. Across the galaxy, human cargo ships began releasing their payloads. But they weren't weapons. They were medical supplies, agricultural technology, construction materials. Aid packages designed to help rebuild worlds that had suffered under Council exploitation for generations, and something else, something far more valuable. Every enslaved species in the galaxy received the same transmission, a code sequence that disabled the loyalty implants the Council used to control its subjects. For the first time in centuries, billions of beings felt the neural shackles in their minds release. They felt their thoughts become their own. They felt freedom. The effect was immediate. On Krelian mining colonies, slaves who had worked their entire lives without hope suddenly realized they could resist. On Torvac conquered worlds, populations that had been beaten into submission for generations discovered that their masters' control technology no longer functioned. On 100 planets across the galaxy, the oppressed rose up against their oppressors. Admiral Vorath watched in horror as his empire began to collapse. His own crew was turning on him. Junior officers from conquered species, suddenly freed from the loyalty conditioning that had made them serve. They didn't attack. They simply stopped obeying. They walked away from their stations, their eyes wide with the wonder of independent thought. "What have you done?" Vorath screamed at the image of President Chen. "We gave them a choice," she replied calmly, "something your council never offered. Now they get to decide for themselves what kind of galaxy they want to live in." The Krellian Emperor's desperate transmission reached Vorath minutes later. The Imperial Palace was under siege. The Imperial fleet was fragmenting as enslaved crew members mutinied. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for 10,000 years was falling apart in hours. It was the same across every council member species. The Torvak warrior clans turned on each other as old grudges, suppressed by central authority, erupted into civil war. The Velian intellectuals found their servant species suddenly unwilling to serve. The Authori discovered that the lesser beings they had looked down upon for millennia were no longer willing to be looked down upon. The Galactic Council didn't fall to human weapons. It fell to its own sins. Every injustice it had committed, every freedom it had stolen, every life it had crushed, all of it came back at once, a wave of consequences that no fleet could stop. 1 year later, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The new Galactic Assembly met on a station orbiting Earth. Neutral ground, chosen because humanity had proven they could be trusted with power. Representatives from 100 species gathered in a chamber designed to symbolize equality. No delegation sat higher than another, no voice counted more than any other. Admiral Negwa, now serving as humanity's ambassador, addressed the assembly. His white hair had grown whiter over the past year. His eyes had seen too much, but his voice still carried the quiet strength that had changed history. "We didn't build our fleet to conquer the galaxy," he said. "We built it so that conquest would no longer be possible. We didn't free the enslaved species to create chaos. We freed them so they could build something better. Now the work of building begins." The new charter was simple. No species could enslave another. No empire could conquer unwilling worlds. Military alliances were defensive only. Trade was free, and exploitation was forbidden. It was the kind of galaxy humanity had wished existed when they first looked at the stars 50 years ago. And it was real, imperfect, fragile, requiring constant work to maintain, but real. 3 years after the ultimatum that had threatened to destroy them, humanity had become the guardians of a new galactic order. Not rulers, never rulers. Just the species that had proven that power didn't have to mean cruelty, that strength didn't have to mean oppression, that victory didn't have to mean becoming your enemy. Captain Sarah Okonkwo walked through a memorial garden on Mars. The garden had been built above Prometheus Base, where millions of soldiers had slept for decades waiting for a war they hoped would never come. Their names were carved into stones that lined the paths, the names of people who had given up normal lives so humanity could survive. She stopped at a particular stone. It bore the name of a woman she had never met but had heard stories about. A pilot who had entered cryosleep 40 years ago and never woken up, a victim of system malfunction. Sarah often visited this stone. She felt a connection to this woman who had made the same sacrifice she had, who had given everything for a future she would never see. "Captain Okonkwo?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to find a young alien girl standing behind her. She was Velmorian, an insect-like species that had been among the most brutally oppressed under council rule. Her compound eyes were wide with curiosity. Her translator device rendered her chittering speech into careful English. "I am Crix. I am a student. My teacher said I could ask you questions for my history project." Sarah smiled and knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "Of course. What would you like to know?" "My teacher said you were there, at the battle, when the human ships appeared and the council ran away." "I was there. I flew one of those ships." Crix tilted her head. "But you had all those weapons. You had the power to destroy the council. Why didn't you?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking at the memorial stones around them. So many names, so many sacrifices, all so that humanity could face this moment and make the right choice. Because the strongest thing a person can do isn't hurt someone who hurt them, she said finally. It's choosing not to. We didn't build all those ships to become what we feared. We built them to make sure no one ever has to be afraid again. Crix considered this. Her compound eyes blinked in patterns that Sarah had learned to recognize as deep thought. My grandmother was a slave. She worked in Krellian mines for 60 years. She died before the freedom came. The girl's voice was quiet but steady. I wish she could have seen what you did. I wish she could have known that someone would care. Sarah felt her throat tighten. I wish she could have too. Will you teach us? Crix asked. To be strong like that? My people were slaves for a long time. We don't know how to be strong without being cruel. We don't know how to have power without hurting others. Sarah looked at this child, this small being from a species that humanity had never met 5 years ago, asking to learn the most important lesson humans had ever learned themselves. That's why we're here, she said. That's exactly why we're here. She stood and took the girl's hand. Together they walked through the memorial garden, past the stones of heroes who had given everything for this moment, toward a building where students from a dozen species were learning the history of a galaxy that had finally begun to change. Behind them, the red sands of Mars stretched toward a horizon that no longer felt threatening. Above them, stars glittered in a sky that had once seemed full of enemies, but now shimmered with possibility. Humanity had looked at the darkness between the stars and seen monsters, so they had become strong enough to face those monsters. And when the time came, they had proven that true strength was the courage to choose mercy. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected. It was better. The stars watched in silence as the galaxy began to heal.